Hey everyone, welcome to Zero Velocity Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Thorpe. As you can see, it's casual Thursdays. I'm sporting my man, Zenkai Sportswear. Thank you very much, Doug. And today, we have a controversial topic because it's not only about health and well-being, but it's about individual identities. And it is a challenging subject to navigate without potentially offending people and who they are as people and their lifestyles and what they've sort of done throughout their life. But what we're here today to talk about is isometrics for fat loss. And as you can see, we're still in the COVID era, so I don't need to have that on my wrist, so I'll get rid of that for now. I know where it is, so I can pick it up. But obesity, when you're looking at what it does to society, it's an economic burden. There's no question about that. It is the #1 cause of preventable death in the world. The total number of people that would be considered obese is 39% of the world's population. And you can see the ticker going across the bottom. 36% of the American public is considered obese. 29% of Canadians. 28% of sort of England and the UK. Mexico's 29%. And we're talking hundreds. Well, we're talking actually 3.7 billion people. That's a lot. Now, I'm not here today to ridicule anybody. I'm not even here today to say that you're going to be able to you have to diet or really perform dynamic exercise to lose weight. Personally, and this is going to offend a lot of people. So let me just preface that from the beginning. I think recommending to an obese population to move is absolutely 100% gross negligent and should never happen. I don't think you should tell an obese person that they have to do dynamic exercise. Yes, you heard me right. Do not do dynamic exercise if you're obese. And that's not to say that you don't end up there. But it's certainly not a place to start. It's not appropriate for almost everybody that's obese. Because if you traditionally look at what has led to that individual being obese, it can be summed up by they're consuming too much food and they're not expending enough energy. So these are some things that we have to think about. Well, if there's a better way to expend energy that's safer than sort of gyrating down a treadmill or gyrating down the street. Because if you look at the numbers, what we're proposing traditionally, you have to do cardio, you have to do dynamic exercise, you have to modify your diet. Well, guess what? That message just failed. And that message has failed brutally to the point where it's just like blah, 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 blah. That's what obese people hear when you start talking about how they're going to lose weight. And that's wrong, because individuals who are obese are often looking for a solution, one that is relatively easy, one that is going to make them feel good about themselves. I mean, if you go into a gym, it's lined with pretty people. It's lined with mirrors. It's got half-naked people walking around in most facilities. Where if you're somebody of girth, that might not be the most comfortable place for you to attend. And I know there's fitness facilities out there dedicated to an obese population. The problem with that is, though, they're still recommending the wrong thing. The amount of injuries that are occurring in that population is too high. So what we're talking about today is isometrics for fat loss. And what is isometrics? Well, it's learning how to contract a muscle where there's no joint movement occurring, or a very, very, very modest sum to the point where you visually can't see it. So it's learning how to tense muscle and contract tissue. Now, the benefit of that is this will teach this population the ability to contract muscle and stabilize joints and get stronger without putting themselves at significant risk. Because when dealing with an obese individual, you have to worry about this thing called rotational inertia. And I don't want to get too sciencey today, but what rotational inertia is, well, it's rotation around an axis, but inertia is the consequence of accelerated motion. So if you're dealing with somebody who's got a significant girth, right, that distance from that spinal axis becomes hugely important. And the calculation is mass times radius squared. So if you took somebody with 200 pounds and a 30-inch waist, well, that 30 inches is going to get squared, so that's going to be like 30 times 30, which is 900. So it's 200 times 900. So I think that's 18,000 if my math is correct. So they have to come up with that many foot-pounds of torque to start and stop. If you look at somebody who's got a 40-inch waist, and when we're dealing with somebody who's obese, a 40-inch waist is not huge, right? It's just easy math for me to convey a message to you, right? So you take that same person who's 200 pounds, and then you go 40 times 40, which is 1,600, right? So instead of 900, it's now 1,600 times 200 pounds. So that's 200 times 14. That's 16, my bad. So it's 3,200 pounds of foot-pounds of torque they have to come up with. So it's significantly more, and they're only 10 inches wider. So those are some things that we have to think about. And what is the effect on the spinal structure, pain, all of this other stuff. But I like to look at obesity more not as, hey, look at that person, my God. And as I said, some of this stuff is going to offend people because I'm going to speak in common language. I'm not going to be PC today. But people traditionally look at a person who is obese and they go, oh my God, did you see that fat person? You guys know what I'm talking about. That's wrong, so let's put it over there. We got that. But society is like, oh my God, did you see that? And we look at people with an energy crisis. Wrong. And that's bothered me for years, that we keep classifying a group of people because they are in need of help in a specific way. So one of the things I'm just going to do is I'm going to pull up some numbers here. And when you're looking at the population of the world, so we're sitting at about just under 8 billion people. So we have over 3 billion individuals that can benefit from what we're going to talk about today. So with the US, so if we can just blow that up just a little bit. So the United States of America is the 12th highest, or they have the 12th highest rate of obesity in the world, right? It's sitting at 36.2%, and it varies from state to state from 23% all the way up to 38.1%. When looking at sort of the different populations. Now, here's the thing that I really, really don't like. Diet is primarily to blame. And when we look at that and we go, diet is primarily to blame, have you guys ever heard of this guy named Michael Phelps? We've all heard of this guy named Michael Phelps. So what I want to bring that up, so look at this. So Michael Phelps, so this guy eats about, when he was competing, eats about 10,000 calories a day. Now, if you think about that, and you go, well, I got to go to McDonald's, and I got to go to Burger King, and I got to go to Pizza Hut, and all these other places, well, it's not really about the nutrition side. It actually is more about the expenditure side. And what does he say about his stuff? I was told I was supposed to eat anywhere between 8,000 and 10,000 calories a day. I just sort of try to cram whatever I can into my body. I pretty much ate whatever I feel like eating, because he had to eat. Now, Michael Phelps, you can see what he looked like eating 10,000 calories a day. I know myself personally, when I want to lose weight, I double my caloric intake. So I have more energy to expend to go through the processes of losing weight. Now, a lot of people go, well, I need to move in order to lose weight. It's like, no, you don't. You really don't. You need to expend calories to lose weight. You need to get strong. You need to get firm. You need to increase the contractility of your muscle structure, because we all know that muscles help burn calories. And the more effective and more efficient your muscular system is, you can burn more calories. And that's where it gets kind of cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you a little story about this lady. Her name's Marianna. So Marianna, if we can sort of pull up that image, just make it a little bit bigger. So Marianna, she lives in a city in Mexico. She was dealing with some of my associates down in Mexico. So Marianna lost 3 pounds, or 3 pant sizes, my apologies, in 11 hours of exercise over 22 consecutive days. She did this without dieting, she did it without cardio, and she did it without lifting weights. All she did was use isometric muscle contractions. She did 30 minutes a day for 22 consecutive days. And she lost 3 pant sizes. That is hugely empowering to an individual who needs to make positive impact. With isometrics, there is virtually no joint impact. There is virtually no joint inflammation. Now, when you're dealing with somebody who is heavier, there may be a high probability that they really hate exercise. So telling them that they have to exercise and gyrate down a treadmill and do these complex motor skilled exercises that make them feel inadequate is wrong. Learning how to contract muscle without moving is simple. Clearly it's effective, because we're able to help Marianna lose 3 pant sizes in 11 hours of committed exercise time. Now, is that a rare occurrence? Well, not really, actually. If you start to look at the science behind isometrics. So that's what we're going to do for the next little while. So isometric exercise is unique in its ability to rapidly increase muscle strength and tone muscle faster than that's seen for dynamic exercise. Okay, cool. That's one piece of data, which actually is pretty cool. Now here's where it gets interesting. So the possibility of differing energy costs suggested by the fact that metabolic changes resulting from a 30-second isometric muscle contraction of the quadriceps are similar to those in 30 seconds of maximum sprinting. I would probably recommend an obese individual not take up sprinting, at least at the start of their exercise adventure. So if you're able to burn as many calories on a per muscle basis, right? So, and this is specific to your quadriceps, so that's your leg muscle. So what the study sort of found was 30 seconds of isometrics was the equivalent to 30 seconds of maximum sprinting. And there's a little bit of play on this, because when you're sprinting, the muscle is only working for a proportionate period of that 30 seconds, right? So it's not very effective, or sorry, it's not very efficient, I guess I should say. So it's only working, you know, you got 2 legs, so let's say it's working out of that 30 seconds, it's only working 15 seconds worth. So with the isometric though, it's working that whole time. So we're looking at it going, okay, cool. So we already have seen some studies or a study that stated that it's faster for producing muscle tone. And muscle tone is how your body holds itself together. So we'll bring up the next slide. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. So in fact, using isometrics for 6 minutes would be the equivalent muscle work of 30 to 35 minutes of gym work on commercial selectorized equipment. Wow, so you're getting basically a 1 minute to 6 minute ratio. You know, call it 5 minutes if you want to be on the shy side. So in a 30-minute workout, Marianna was getting the equivalent benefit of a 3-hour workout on selectorized equipment. Without the risk, without the complexity of the movement patterns. And then we start to look at it and you go, well, why is that beneficial? Well, we know muscles burn calories. We talked about that. So if we can increase the efficiency of your muscular system to fire better, to activate muscle more, right? And this sort of study looked at it and it compared dynamic motion, so concentric and eccentric. And we've talked about this in other presentations. But what we're able to figure out is isometrics is able to increase the activation rate of the muscle tissue by 95 to 100%, making it by far the most effective means of enhancing your metabolic conditioning. And that metabolic conditioning is what helps oxidize fat. Now, when looking at a couple more slides anyways, so these results suggest that an increase in maximum voluntary contraction observed in the first couple days of isometric resistance training can be accounted for by an increase in the rate of activation at the onset of muscle contraction. This is just a different study supporting what we just talked about enhancing that contractility of tissue. And from there, we jump over here, and this is huge. This is a game changer. This is when we're starting to get into the hormones and the real deep science. There's insulin growth factors that are at play when you're looking at enhancing the actual structure of the muscle and the prevention of sarcopenia, which is the wasting away. So this stuff helps increase the size of muscle structure. So what we have here is we have shown the upregulation of muscle-specific IGF-1EA, which is just basically an isoform, and MGF isoforms after resistance exercise is a phenomenon which occurs in response to isometric contractions undertaken by women. The upregulation persists for at least 2 days after exercise, a finding that will help to inform and design the future training studies. You know, so that gets really, really, really complex. So what that basically means in a nutshell is you're able to build muscle and sustain the growth of that muscle tissue longer as you age. Because what happens is when you lose that sort of insulin growth factor as a hormone, you start to have this muscle atrophy. And that's what's called sarcopenia. And that affects men and it affects women. And when we know that muscles burn calories and we're already starting to lose muscle mass, this can help combat that. And here's a cool little picture just to sort of show. It's a different study that looks at the effects of IGF isoforms on muscle growth and sarcopenia. And what we get down into the nitty-gritty of it is when you look at that real fine print, because it's way too small for you guys to see, as well as me, because I'm mildly blind. So what it says here is basically it stimulates additional pathways that guarantee, not just might affect, they guarantee functional hypertrophic phenotypes even during aging. So isometrics can help build and prevent muscle loss as you age. Now the benefit of all this stuff when we're looking at it and going, well, thanks Brad, so what? So you've told me that I can burn fat in 6 minutes. I have the same caloric expenditure as sprinting. Well, now it becomes just making a conscious choice for my population out there who's listening, right? Because when you start to look at the complexity of what we're trying to embark on, we need to make this simple. And one of the things that happens to an obese population is the actual fat cell can only get so large. And here's a big, huge diatribe of really, really complex stuff. So I'm going to let you guys just read this. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to just leave this up here for a minute, right? Because it gets really, 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 complicated. Actually, I'll read it for you. The maintenance of blood flow is a critical factor for tissue oxygen and substrate supply. Told you it was going to get complicated. The potential large mass of adipose tissue deeply influences the body's distribution of blood flow. This is due to the increased peripheral resistance in obesity and the role of this tissue as the ultimate destination for unused excess of dietary energy. I love how they phrase dietary energy, right? That just comes back to Michael Phelps. He was needing to consume 10,000 calories a day for his activity levels, right? He was burning 1,000 calories an hour. Okay, so if we jump back here. So however, adipose tissue cannot grow indefinitely. The tissue must defend itself against an avalanche of nutrients provoking inordinate growth and inflammation. In the obese, large adipose tissue masses show lower blood flow, limiting the access of circulating substrates. So let's just think about that for a second. So your body naturally starts to defend itself against your increased caloric expenditure or increased caloric ingestion. So it produces inflammation and it slows the blood flow into that adipose tissue. That's kind of the important part I wanted to sort of talk about, was that slowing down of adipose tissue or blood flow to adipose tissue. Because in order to help metabolize that adipose tissue, individuals need to increase blood flow to adipose tissue. Now, a couple of years ago, this lady stumbled on to this little tidbit of awesomeness, to be honest. So when you do an isometric-based contraction, there's a 7-fold increase, so a 7 times increase in blood flow to the adjacent adipose tissue associated with the contracting muscle. Now, why is that important? Well, if I'm doing a full body isometric contraction, like I'm just tensing everything up, and I sustain that for a period of time, what will happen is that my brain says to the muscle, send oxygen to that working muscle. The working muscle is occluded because you're squeezing it really, 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 really tight. And because the blood can't get sort of in there, what happens, it gets diverted into the local adipose tissue. And it helps helps metabolize that adipose tissue at a rate of 700% more. How crazy is that? Right? So if you're looking at individuals, and by the way, that doesn't occur to the same level of efficiency doing dynamic exercise. Because when you're doing dynamic exercise, the blood goes in, the blood goes out, the blood goes in. So that perfusion of blood flow into the muscle is just working normal. There's no occlusion to it, so the blood doesn't have to get diverted into local adipose tissue. So those are some things that we're looking at. And here's that study that I was just sort of mentioning. So adipose tissue blood flow adjacent to the active muscle increases 7-folds during continuous isometric knee extension. Now, in conclusion, we report that the present study that blood flow in subcutaneous adipose tissue of the leg is increased from rest to exercise, and that's isometric exercise, in an exercise intensity-dependent manner, but only in the vicinity of the working muscle. The adenosine receptors whatever that word is, attenuates this blood flow enhancement at the highest exercise intensities. So working out crazy, crazy, crazy hard in an isometric isn't going to be as effective as working out maybe at a 75 to 80% workload. Now the cool thing is as you do an isometric, subsequently using an ISOPHIT, let's say, and you're pushing against an immovable object, so you'll start to fatigue, and that sort of the amount of force you're exerting goes down, your perceived exertion goes up. And what they're able to see when you're looking at sustained isometric contractions over a period of time, you'll have your peak output, let's say that's 100 pounds. And as you consistently sort of put forth that effort, let's say it's over 45 seconds, that period of time, you can't maintain that 100%. So your force output's going to start to now drop down. And let's say it drops down to 38 pounds of force down here. So there's been a 62-pound drop-off between your maximum force output and your current, what would be perceived as your maximum effort, because this is just grueling and brutal if you've done sustained isometrics. And now the interesting thing is the caloric expenditure associated with that 38 pounds is the exact same as your perceived exertion at the 100% load. I didn't sort of pull that study up, so we're not going to sort of talk about it at an in-depth level. But what we're going to think about is if I can sort of work through fatigue states, I can burn more calories in a much safer environment. This is going to be a much safer place for an obese population to start. And without getting into the hormonal aspects, the lifestyle aspects, because you got to look at a lot of reasons why people potentially have gained weight. You can look at it from neglect, from a parental perspective. You can look at it from an economic perspective. Said parent didn't have the right finances in order to buy better food. But if we think about what we just have to do, we have to expend more energy safely. And that screams isometrics. It's affordable. You can use anything. So if we go to like a wide camera right now, or a wide shot, or a wider shot, I'm good right here. Right, so I'm up against a wall. So I can come back and I can do shoulder exercises right here. I can do a trunk exercise right here. I can do a leg exercise. Which way am I going? I'll go this way. I can do a leg exercise up here. So I don't need expensive equipment. What I need is an understanding of what needs to be accomplished. And it comes back to you need to burn more calories than you consume and run a deficit if you want to burn fat. You don't need to do cardio. You don't need to lift weights. You don't even really need to modify your diet. You may have to expend more than you're consuming. But as I said, if I want to lose weight or lose fat, I double my caloric intake. But I also do exercise half an hour every day. Now, if I want to improve that, I may need to do an hour of isometrics every day. But for my own personal time constraints and my own goals in life, 30 minutes is sufficient. Now, if you're just starting out, I wouldn't recommend 30 minutes. Let's start with 6 minutes. Why? Because 6 minutes is the equivalent to 35 minutes of resistance training. Start with something that you can make a commitment, you can do on a daily basis, right? And the key is daily. Don't take days off. Now, don't work hard or too hard that you are forced to take days off. Because the notion of creating an inflammatory response because you exercise too hard is illogical and outdated. Working out at a sub-maximal level where the intensity is enough to gain benefit versus abuse needs to be considered. If you have any questions on what we sort of discussed today, email me. I am 100% open to talking with everybody about the subject matter. We tried to keep it real simple. I know we sort of went off on some tangents, but when you're looking at isometrics, it's just a safer, healthier, more effective and efficient way to stimulate fat loss, cardiovascular health, as well as bone density, increased tendon strength, as well as muscle strength and stability. That's the power of isometrics, and that's where we need to start with individuals who are suffering from obesity because it is a disease and it is killing too many people, and too many people I know that suffer from it. And there's mental depression, there's diabetes, there's heart disease and heart attacks, and there's a whole bunch of different cancers. Now, I will leave this with you guys, and it's not necessarily the happiest tone, but it's an interesting story to tell you what's wrong with society. I was touring a lifestyle community a couple of years ago, and I was down in the US, so traditionally, as you guys know, it's 36 to 40% basically obese population. And I was looking around this aged community, and I sort of said to my host, it's like, where are all the obese people? He looked at me and said, they're all dead. That's how tragic of a story this is. The average age was 74 years old of this community. And they don't have an obese problem. It's because it's not that they're not members of the community. It's just they're traditionally dead. And we need to change that, because that's tragic. And Isometrics, in my educated and humble opinion, can influence that. Let Marianna be an inspiration. That was 3 weeks plus 1 day. She was down 3 pant sizes. Anyways, if you have questions, my email is brad@isophit.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Peace out, everyone.